you do not fear death. And many of you guys may wonder why would I make such a video. However, I feel that this video is something that needs to be addressed because of the fear of death is something that robs us of the present, the here and now, the one most precious life that we have. We are wasting it because we are afraid to die. And the reason we have this fear of death is usually because of some type of belief, some type of religious belief. Someone told us this would happen, that would happen, and usually it's some type of fear tactic. Wow, look at this, guys. Check this out. I don't know if you guys can see this big thing, this big fish or something, I don't know. Wow, I don't know what it is. It's kind of, anyhow, I just missed it. Anyhow, it's over that way now. Some big shark looking thing. But anyhow, back to what I was saying. So the fear of death is something that robs us of the present. The only moment that exists, the only moment that is precious to us is the now. However, because of this fear of death, we tend to not live our life to the fullest because we have all of these beliefs again, thinking that there will be some type of eternal damnation or some type of punishment that we only believe. And again, for most of you guys who have seen any of my videos, by now, I think you know that I do not believe in believing. So with that being said, the number one culprit, if I may say, that promotes this fear is religion. Religion tells us that if we do not do what we need to do in reference to being moral individuals, if we do not have a particular belief, then we are most likely to spend some type of time in eternity being punished for something that we did in this lifetime. However, speaking from an existentialist perspective, I am here to say that we were born initially, we were free from all beliefs at birth. We did not have any political views, any religious affiliations, anything of that sort when we originally came into the world. However, as time went on, our environment, our culture, our relationships with our friends, our family, and our community, those things actually affected us in such a way that we believe the things that we were told to believe, not knowing if they were true or not. That is why, from an existentialist perspective, we would say that the being self is the true nature that is priority and in principle what comes first before our beliefs. Beliefs are something that happens as time goes on, again, as we become older, as these things, individuals come and go into our lives, our perspective on life also changes as well. But what I'm here to talk about today also is why it is important that we get a full understanding of how important it is to get a grasp on this belief or this perceived notion of death, because it literally robs us of our innate freedom, a freedom to be who we were naturally designed to be, free agents, not objects of uh, incarceration, if I may say. So we were meant to be free agents, but because of our beliefs and things that we are not aware to be true, such as death, heaven, and hell, things of that sort, we tend to give up our freedom and we tend to opt in for a bondage type of life, believing things that we have absolutely no evidence of to be true at all. So again, speaking from an existentialist perspective, I am more concerned with the idea of being in bondage when there is no such thing as being in bondage. And this bondage that I'm talking about comes from not knowing who and what you are. Because again, the fear of death solely arises from not knowing who and what you are. Because if you were to do self inquiry, if you were to do self evaluation at the deeper level, at the core level of who you are, you would understand that the awareness, the isness, the consciousness that you are, it is impossible for that thing to die. Yes, there might be, the object may die, the object may dissolve and go away, the mind may dissipate. However, the awareness itself is something that is eternal. And for example, to prove my point, I don't know how old many of you guys are watching this video, but let's say you're 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever how old you are, do you feel like you came into existence on your birthday, or do you feel like you always existed? Now you have to trust your awareness, and I'm not asking you to go off with your mind says, but feel within yourself, your awareness, your consciousness will tell you the answer. And most of us will say, you know what, I feel like I always had existed. I feel like I didn't just exist, started to come into existence one particular day. It feels like I always existed. So that is what I'm talking about here today. That thing that always existed, that beingness, that awareness, that thing called life itself. So in order for life to die, it would be somewhat, like, I don't know, like the water behind me, saying that the water behind me could become dry. Water in itself is an eccentric nature, or essence is wetness. Life itself is eccentric nature is life itself. There is no death in life. However, there's a process in life called birth and death, but life itself is cannot die. It's like the sun. The sun's job is to shine, and that is the job of the sun. And the sun does not need any one to make it shine or help it shine. It just does what it does. Life is the same thing. Life is just life, and life, only thing life knows how to do is live. So with that being said, when we go and do this self inquiry, just remember, go back and watch my video, Who Am I? That video also goes into detail about the methods, if I may say, the three methods, fundamental principles to ask yourself when you want to find out something, whether something is aware or not. So today we're talking about death. So for example, you ask yourself from an awareness perspective, uh, is death, does death change? Death changes, yes. One minute there's death, next minute there's life, but the awareness does not change. So therefore, death is not the fundamental thing of who you are. You do not die. The awareness itself does not change. The death change. So therefore, you are not the death. And then we look at the second concept when we want to find out something, if something is the principal or fundamental aspect in life. We look at death from the awareness perspective. Or you aware of death? So you are aware of death. So the awareness is the subject, and the death is the object. So from the awareness, from the object and subject perspective, the death is the object that's being aware of. So the awareness is the subject, and the death is the object. Just like the eyes are the object, and the thing seen are the eyes are the subject, and the thing seen are the object. So in this particular case, the death itself is also the object, and the subject, the unchanging thing, is the awareness of this death. So, so far we have principle one: the death changes, the awareness does not change. Therefore, death, you are not the death. Principle two: you are aware of the death is the object, and you are the subject. And then we have principle three: is the death sentient or unsentient? Basically, are you aware of death, or is death aware of you? So those would be the three principles. And please go back and watch my video, Who Am I? That video is going to go into a lot greater detail and tell you guys about what about who am I. That video is going to answer a lot of these questions as well. So if you go back and watch that video is going to give you guys a much clearer detail about this subject object principle, what I'm talking about, and that's going to help you to come to an understanding of who you are as well. Also, if you go and you could check out video What is Love, that video also goes into much greater detail. Then you could go and check out the video there's a few other videos that actually complements this video as well. So check those videos out. Those videos are going to be in reference to death as well, knowing who you are as the fundamental self, the consciousness, the pure awareness. That is what we are talking about here today. So back to what I was saying. So when we go back and we look at, from a religious perspective, we look at the religions and all the religions of the world today. In most cases, Western religions have some type of concept of there being an eternal damnation or hell or heaven or something of that sort. And when we look at those religions, we basically have these are all beliefs that what may happen, what may not happen. However, there is no real factual evidence per se of this eternal damnation or this eternal reward, if I may put it that way. However, the Buddhists, they do have some concept of hell, and that concept is also temporal. That is not a real, that's not a real permanent hell, but that is temporal. And so the Buddhists itself have some type of concept of there being hell, but that's a different topic for another day. However, what I'm talking about here today is more of a Western uh, Abrahamic religious perspective, talking about this eternal damnation, this thing, this place that we go, and we're going to be tortured, and we're going to have all of these negative things happen to us. However, that concept is the real root cause of our suffering, believing in the fear of this death, thinking that we will be punished in some way, some shape or form, and that is why we have this fear of this initial fear of death, because of our religious beliefs. And if we were to remove those religious beliefs, we would tend to actually come to some place of freedom. And that's what I am talking about here today: achieving freedom, freedom from bondage of all different beliefs, hatred, greed, lust, desires, all of these things that tend to keep us in bondage. However, one of the main, number one, reasons for this bondage and this fear of death is religion. And that religion is what I am trying to clarify today as being a root cause also of this fear or this misunderstanding of death as well. So again, if we look back at and if we look at this death perspective, we will see that in life we are given a few examples so that we could not really be so afraid of death. One example would be before we were born. Before we were born, we didn't know who we were. We didn't know anything. We don't have any remembrance of any emotions, any feelings, or anything of that sort. We don't really remember anything before we were born. And however, we just appeared shortly thereafter. And however, that knowing nothingness, that no existenceness, this non-existenceness, that would be a perfect example of death. And also, from that perspective, again, there was nothing really to be afraid of because there was nothing to be aware of. And so another example of this feeling of death, this experience of death, would be in meditation, deep meditation. When we go into deep meditation, we will experience a no thingness, a sense of stillness, a sense of quietness, whereas we are not aware of anything and we just go into this blank void space, if I may say. That would be another example of this thing called death as well, or the perceived concept of death. And then we also have the concept of the dream state when we go into deep, sorry, not the dream state, the deep sleep state is when we go into a state of nothingness as well. And that state, that deep sleep state, is also a place where there's actually no awareness of no thing. We are aware, but we are just aware of no thing. And most individuals would say there was nothing to be aware of. They don't remember the dream, the deep sleep state, and that is correct. There was the reason they don't remember anything because there was nothing to be aware of. There was no objects to be aware of, and that is the goal of deep sleep, is to basically go back to that place of non-awareness of objects, and that is the reason why you don't remember anything. It's not that you was not aware, you just was not aware of any objects, but you are aware of awareness itself. Because if you were not aware, you would not remember not having anything to be aware of, if that made any sense. So, and another example would be when we go to take an operation or have an operation, we go into something called anesthesia. And anesthesia would be something where they give you a drug and then the body, the mind, and all that is incapacitated. And that too is a state of nothingness where all sense of awareness tends to disappear and we don't remember any feelings or emotions or anything of that sort. We just pretty much go back into that place of nothingness. So again, those would be examples of uh, death-like symptoms, if I may say, death-like experiences, if I may, to be more exact. So, however, the root cause of this fear of death is not knowing who you are. And that really comes from the ego, the false self. The false self does not want to basically die. Having a ego death is like going into being non-existence, and that is the root cause of this fear, because the false self, the false, the ego is the self that you think you are, that does not want to die, that does not want to go anywhere. So that is what is causing the fear. However, when you do self-inquiry, when you look into yourself and you do self-introspection and things of that sort, that fear will dissipate. And that is what we're talking about here today, trying to gain the freedom from that fear of death, and so we could regain the freedom and live our life and not be robbed from this fear of something that we are not actually sure what it is per se. Because an existentialist perspective, the being, the self, the consciousness, the isness is the fundamental principle, the fundamental aspect of life itself. And so, therefore, having a religious belief or some religious belief telling you that there will be some type of punishment and punishment or reward without actually having any evidence of this, this would be considered bad faith. From an existentialist perspective, having bad faith would be something, believing something, and you deep down inside, you know it doesn't really feel right or something feels wrong with it, but you believe it anyhow because you tend to make up some type of excuse for why you believe it. And it creates what they call cognitive dissonance. And when the cognitive dissonance is when we have two or more conflicting thoughts or ideas or beliefs, and one thought is telling you something, and another thought is telling you some other thing, and it just basically makes you feel very uncomfortable and at ease. For example, from a religious perspective, most individuals would say, despite whatever they believe, unless you use the Western religion perspective, going to be punished for eternity, and only have lived for such a short period of time in this life, that doesn't sound too fair. That doesn't sound too, most individuals will struggle with that. But however, some part of them they would accept it and they say, well, hey, we can't question God or we can't question the word of God. But they know it in themselves that does not sound like a good deal, because why would you go and get punished for eternity, and for doing something, and you only lived a few years of your life? So that kind of doesn't really make much sense. However, when you have a belief, a religious belief, you are not able to question anything. You just have to basically blindly believe and accept whatever that doctrine says to be true. So that in itself would be something what I would be considered to be delusional, believing things that are not necessarily true, but you accept them to be true without having the proper evidence. So again, this would also cause disharmonious uh, beliefs in ourselves, because now we are somewhat delusional. And so we would say, many would say that I don't know if you guys ever heard of something called Pascal's wager. Pascal's wager is a belief, not really a belief, but a philosophical concept that it is much better to believe in God than not, because Pascal wager says that if you believe in God and then uh, God does exist, and you do live, a godly life, and you do live a godly life, you get to go to heaven and you get rewarded. But if you do not believe in God and God does exist, and then you will be punished for eternity. So that is like a catch-22. If you believe and it works out in your favor, it's a win. And if you believe and there is no God, it still works out in your favor. So you had nothing to lose. However, that is incorrect, because you do lose a lot of things when you have beliefs that you do not necessarily know is true, or you do not have any sufficient evidence, because it limits you as the person that you are. It limits your relationships with individuals, their beliefs. If you look at the history of religion, religion has caused so many deaths and so many pain and suffering throughout the decades and so forth. We have no idea, if we go back in time, most individuals will not believe that their beliefs have done the atrocities that their beliefs have done, their religious beliefs, the things that they believe. They would not believe that their religion could have done those things. But yes, there was a lot of death and punishment and persecution in the name of God and religion. So the same way, you may not go to that extent, such as the Inquisition, to torture individuals who do not have the same beliefs as you. However, you might not be that extreme. However, you do not, if you do have a belief, a particular religious belief, we tend to not uh, see other individuals with different beliefs as being equal. We tend to look at their beliefs as being inferior, so therefore their beliefs is inferior, so they are inferior as a people in general, because we tend to identify our beliefs directly with who we are as well. We tend to believe our beliefs, or who we are. So we tend to treat individuals uh, a certain particular way because of their beliefs as well. And we notice, because there's all type of wars all over the world. This particular race, this particular religion is fighting with this particular religion because they believe this particular thing, this particular piece of land is ours. We inherited this and this and that. And we see this going on today. Individuals being slaughtered, individuals being killed in the name of their God. So we cannot say that having a religious belief is harmless. That is not the case. It was never harmless back then, and it is not harmless today. And that is why most individuals who watch my videos, they will know by now that I say that I do not believe in believing. Believing is somewhat what I would call blind faith. Believing in things that you do not necessarily know to be true would be somewhat I would call delusional. So again, believing in things is not harmless, and that is what we're talking about today. Because having these religious beliefs about a particular religion, sect, or whatever, thinking that you will die and be punished and this and that, has robbed you from the very life that you have been given today. So yes, it is not. You may not have harmed another person. in because of your belief, but you are actually harming yourself. You are given the gift of life to live your life, but you somehow, for whatever reason, you are not living your life to the fullest. You are living in bondage. You are living in somewhat of a cage, per se, or a prison, more likely to be accurate than to be free. So freedom is what we're talking about here today. Achieving freedom, which only can be achieved from knowing who you are. So again, once we come to know who we are, this fear of this perceived death will no longer be the case. And for example, something came across my mind as there was a biblical story when Yeshua, Jesus Christos, he brought the dead girl, Jairus, I think she was 12 years old. He brought her back to life, and everybody was crying, and everybody was, heartbroken and all that. And Joshua Christos, Jesus, said that she was asleep. So that in itself, why would Jesus use the term sleep to reference death if it was nothing more than a state of sleep, a state of unconsciousness per se of objects, but still being aware. So he did not say that she was unconscious. He did not say that she was paralyzed. He did not say any of these things. He said that she was asleep. So if we see death for what it is, a perceived uh, is a perceived the perceived idea of non-existence, and there's no such thing as nothing non-existence. There will always be existence, because if you are the existence itself, you will always exist, and there needs to be no creator to create existence, because existence is uh, intrinsic of itself. That is why they call it existence. So again, so when we get rid of this fear of death, when we get rid of this fear of the punishment, only then we can see and have a greater appreciation for the life that we was given. But until then, we will never really embrace the life, because we will always have some type of restriction, and we will also always live in fear, thinking that if I do not be this way, I do not do that, I will be punished. And which brings me to another point, that this most of our behaviors from a religious perspective, our moral behaviors, we are not acting morally by nature. We are acting morally out of fear. We are afraid to go and be punished. That is why we do the things that we do. That doesn't sound morally correct. What I'm saying is that those individuals who are religious, they would say that without a God per se, there cannot be morality, and that is incorrect, because you have atheists who, some of those guys and girls are the most moral individuals there are, because they don't have a deity per se to correct them or punish them. Most all of their actions come from their own eternal self. They're not afraid of being punished, so they do good. They do good because they feel that is the most moral right thing to do. However, when you have a belief system, a religious belief, you are not necessarily doing the right thing because you want to do the right thing, or you are naturally moral. You are most likely doing it because of out of fear. You are being the nice person that you are because of fear of this punishment after death. So you're starting to see where I'm going with this. This death, this fear of death, this not knowing who you are is not just harmless. There is consequences. There is things that come out of this very negative. We treat others, individuals differently because of having different beliefs. We segregate ourselves. We don't love others because of their beliefs. We harm others because of their beliefs, and so forth and so on. So back to what I was saying again, morally, from an existentialist perspective, we we have the ability to create our own purpose and become good or bad based on our own actions. We can do right or wrong from our own understanding of what is right and wrong. And there needs to be no creator per se, because like I said, the atheists, most atheists, those individuals are more moral than many other religious or theist individuals, because the atheist does not have any fear of punishment. They do the right thing because that is the right thing to do. Unlike a religious individual, they are doing the right thing because they fear they are going to be punished by some creator or some being or entity that has uh, that has the control over them. And please go and watch my video, Who Am I? That video is going to tell you guys in greater detail about what I'm talking about also as well. So for example, it would be more like being in a relationship with a female or male, and that female abuses you, uh, and you want to leave, and you want to leave, and they tell you, they say, oh, uh, you could leave if you want. You could leave if you want, but if you leave, I'm going to kill you. And then they say, but you have free will. You have the free will to leave if you want, but the consequences is I'm going to kill you. So does that really sound like free will? Because that's what most religious individuals would say, is because we have free will. We do not have free will when we have a gun to our head. It's not by choice that we choose. Most individuals choose their religious belief out of fear. And so again, just like saying being in a relationship, when your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend tell you you could stay, you have the choice to stay or go. You have the freedom to come or go, but if you leave, I will kill you. And that is not free will. So that is exactly how religion is. They're saying that you could follow me or spend eternity in damnation and hell. That is what the options are. So most individuals, again, because they do not know who they are, they pick the option of uh, to follow the masses. Again, Pascal's wager is much easier, is more safer to believe and be safe than to not believe and be punished eternally. So that free will uh, concept does not necessarily, scrutiny does not stand up, because again, most individuals, if you take away the fear, the punishment of hell and eternal damnation and all of these things, most individuals would not believe in any religions. However, because most individuals do not know themselves, they do not know who they are, they naturally can be misled into believing fallacies. So this is what this video is all about today, coming to an understanding of who you are and what you are. And when you come to the understanding of who you are and what you are, your fear of death in itself also will dissolve, because there is nothing to be afraid of, because there is nothing that is going to die. We are talking about the object dies, the body dies, the mind dies, things of that sort. The objective changing thing dies, but the subject, the consciousness, the awareness, those those traits of what I'm talking about are eternal. So it is very important that we come to some type of realization in this lifetime. In spirituality, it is called the great death, to experience death once we are alive. And I'm not talking about dying medically on the deathbed and heart stopping and coming back to life. I'm talking about dying consciously, knowing who you are, the ego death, the false self death. That is what I'm talking about. And that is what they are calling in spirituality to be born again. That is what we're talking about. Not being born again at a later time, at a later date, at a later place. I'm talking about being born again presently in this lifetime, in this lifetime, in this world, not somewhere else, not going somewhere else, not looking to be somewhere else. And then when you look somewhere else, to go somewhere else, to be somewhere else other than now here, you rob yourself of the precious now. that all exists and only exists is the now. But if you continue to believe all of these things, you are robbing yourself of the life, the precious life that you are given. And that is what I'm talking about today as well. So having these beliefs that deceive us into all of these having these fears is not just harmless, it is actually very, very, very detrimental to our life itself. So with that being said, hopefully this video give each and every one of you some type of understanding to at least do self-evaluation and self-inquiry and to know thyself, because if at least one person could be come to realization and not have the fear of death, that would be a great thing. However, that understanding is not going to go away only until you know yourself. So the fear of death is nothing more than an illusion. And when you come to knowing thyself, that fear will dissipate, and eventually that fear itself will disappear. If you ask me, am I afraid of death? No, I am not. I am 110% not afraid of death. However, I am not telling you that I am lining up to die. I'm not saying that I want to die. I love my life. I love being alive. However, if I was to just die suddenly, I would not I would not have the fear of death, because of my understanding. I do not think there will be anything to fear. Unlike individuals who are religious, they have all of these very strong beliefs about life and after death and all that. However, they are extremely afraid of death, and that doesn't make sense. If you are given such certainty that you would get all of these rewards after death, why would you still be afraid? That does not make any sense at all. So therefore, that is what I'm saying again, being delusional, lying to oneself again in bad faith, believing something that you know that you do not necessarily believe, but you have to believe it because of, again, your culture, your family, your relationship with friends, and so forth in the community. They tell you to believe this thing, so you believe it at all costs, despite the fact you might not necessarily 110% resonate with that belief, but you do. So again, your freedom is being violated because of this belief. Again, making the point, all any beliefs is not harmful. They are harmful in one way, shape, or form, whether it be physical, psychological, emotional, and mainly spiritually. They are all harmful. All beliefs, all religions are harmful in one way or another. And I'm just saying this from an existentialist perspective. That is where I am coming from. So with that being said, I think I'm going to end this video. And I thank each and every one of you once again for sticking around this long and watching all of my videos. For those of you who have liked, shared, and subscribe, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And someday, at some point, I will start creating videos about astrology, because I am an astrologer. However, I feel that these things are also holistic topics that needs to be addressed as well, because as an astrologer, I have the ability to look into all aspects of your life and tell you everything about you, but you guys know nothing about me. So I go into great detail and great effort to make you guys have a much better understanding of who I am, as well as an individual, as a person as well. And that way we will know each other rather than just me knowing everything about you as well. So again, once again, with that being said, there's no reason to be afraid. The only reason you are afraid is because of the false self, the ego, the false self that you do not know who you truly are is the root cause of your fear of death. But you, as the pure awareness, the pure consciousness, the pure understanding, does not. And with that being said, I am Triple P, and I'm out.
Oh.